The neon glow of Jupiter's rings painted strange shadows across Theron Nash's weathered face as he stared at the holographic message floating above his desk. The blue projection flickered, showing the familiar features of Ambassador Zorax, his skin the color of twilight, and his 4 eyes holding the wisdom of centuries. "My old friend," the recording began, Zorax's voice weaker than Theron remembered. "If you're watching this, then the poison has finally won. The Consortium's assassins were more subtle than I expected." He paused, a rattling cough shaking his tall frame. "But this isn't about my death. It's about what comes after." Theron's cybernetic hand clenched involuntarily. After 15 years of peace, the mention of assassination brought back memories of the Nexus Wars, when he'd first met Zorax. Back then, Theron had been a decorated commander of the Earth's special operations, and Zorax was the Nixian ambassador trying to forge an alliance between their peoples. "I'm leaving you everything, Theron. My ship, the stellar drift, my research, and most importantly, guardianship of my daughters." Zorax's image smiled sadly. "Lyra and Venna are no longer children. They've grown into remarkable women, each brilliant in their own way. But they're in danger." The message paused as Theron's security system flashed a warning. 3 unmarked ships had just dropped out of hyperspace near his orbital apartment. Their energy signatures matched Consortium vessels. "The Consortium believes my bloodline holds the key to the Resonance Archive," Zorax continued. "They're right, but not in the way they think. I've hidden the truth in plain sight, protected by ancient laws and modern greed. To keep my daughters safe, to access the Archive's power, there must be a binding. A marriage." Theron's good eye widened as understanding dawned. "You crafty old star snake," he muttered, already reaching for his pulse rifle. "By the laws of my people, and the treaty signed after the war, you are now heir to the House of Zorax." The message continued. "Only through marriage to both my daughters can the bloodline be secured and the Archive protected. I know it's an impossible thing to ask, but you're the only one I trust with this burden." The security system screamed as the Consortium ships opened fire. Energy bolts splashed against the apartment's shields, turning the view of Jupiter into a chaos of light and shadow. "The choice is yours, old friend." Zorax's image flickered one last time. "But know this, what I've hidden away could reshape the galaxy. In the wrong hands, it could unravel reality itself. In the right hands," he smiled, "it could heal the wounds that still bleed from the war." The message ended just as the first boarding pod punched through the weakening shields. Theron grabbed his go-bag and the small crystal pendant Zorax had given him years ago. He'd always thought it was just a friendship token, but now. The apartment's door exploded inward, admitting 3 figures in sleek combat suits. Their helmets bore the golden insignia of the Consortium's elite hunters. Theron didn't hesitate. His cybernetic eye calculated trajectories as he dove behind his desk, pulse rifle already singing. The first hunter fell, chest plate shattered. The second managed to fire a neural net that Theron barely dodged. The third spoke, voice distorted by their helmet. "Surrender the inheritance rights. Nash. The daughters of Zorax belong to the Consortium." Theron's response was a micro-grenade that filled the room with blinding light. By the time the hunters could see again, he was gone, dropping through the emergency shaft toward the lower levels where he kept his ship. As artificial gravity shifted around him, Theron touched the crystal pendant. It felt warm against his skin, pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. Zorax had always said humans possessed something unique, an adaptability that made them perfect bridges between species. Now Theron understood what his friend had really meant. The Consortium wouldn't stop hunting. The laws of inheritance gave them only 30 days to prevent the marriage, after which the bloodline would be legally and irreversibly bound. 1 month to find Lyra and Venna, to explain their father's plan, to decide if they were willing to bind their lives to his. 1 month to outrun the most powerful organization in the galaxy, protect 2 women he hadn't seen in years, and possibly save reality itself. The crystal pulsed again as Theron reached his ship. As he initiated launch sequences, he allowed himself a grim smile. Zorax had always had a talent for making the impossible seem merely difficult. Now it was up to Theron to prove his old friend right. The research station Helios hung in the shadow of Saturn's rings, its crystalline spires reflecting starlight like frozen flames. Theron's ship, a modified stealth courier, approached with minimal power signature. He knew Lyra would be here. She'd inherited her father's passion for xenorchaeology. The station's security protocols recognized his ship's credentials, a final gift from Zorax. As he docked, the crystal pendant grew warmer, its pulse synchronizing with the station's power grid. Not just jewelry then, but a key of sorts. Unauthorized presence detected in primary research bay. The station's AI announced as Theron stepped onto the observation deck. Security protocols disabled. Warning. Consortium signatures identified. They'd beaten him here. Theron broke into a run, his cybernetic eye switching to combat mode. The research bay doors were sealed, but his enhanced hand made short work of the lock. Inside, he found chaos. Lyra stood surrounded by 3 consortium agents, her twilight skin darkened with exertion. She'd grown since he'd last seen her, no longer the quiet teenager who'd watched her father's diplomatic meetings. Now she moved like a warrior, using a modified gravity manipulator to keep her attackers at bay. The Archive's location, Doctor, one agent demanded. Your father's death doesn't have to be repeated. Uncle Theron. Lyra's 4 eyes widened as she spotted him. The momentary distraction cost her as a neural whip caught her arm. Theron didn't hesitate. His pulse rifle took down 1 agent, while his cybernetic hand launched a scatter burst of micro-EMPs. The remaining agent's shields flickered and died. Lyra used the opportunity to slam them into a wall with a gravity pulse. Your timing hasn't improved, she said, rubbing her injured arm. But I'm glad to see you. We need to move. The station's compromised. Theron helped her up. Where's Venna? Engineering complex on Mars. She's developing new quantum communication systems. Lyra gathered several data crystals. The consortium's been watching us since Father died. They think we know where he hid the archive. Do you? No, but we know it's important. Father said. She paused, looking at the pendant around Theron's neck. He gave you the resonance key. More footsteps approached the research bay. Story time later, Theron said. We need to reach your sister before they do. They ran for his ship, dodging security drones now compromised by consortium control. As they lifted off, larger vessels emerged from behind Saturn's rings. This is consortium security, the voice transmitted. Return the Nixian hair or be destroyed. They can't kill us, Lyra said, strapping into the co-pilot's seat. They need our genetic signature to access the archive. They don't need you completely intact to get that. Theron engaged the stealth systems. Your father left me a message. There's a way to protect you both, but you might not like it. The pursuing ships opened fire as they accelerated toward Mars. Lyra's hands danced across the sensor panel, using her knowledge of gravitational fields to plot a course through Saturn's rings. Father always said you were the only human he truly trusted. What did he tell you? Theron guided their ship through a debris field, using the ice and rock as cover. He left me everything. His ship, his research. He paused, dodging another barrage. And the right to marry his daughters. The ship lurched as Lyra's surprise affected her gravity control. Marriage. To both of us. That's the only way to secure the bloodline according to Nixian law, Theron finished. Once the binding is complete, the consortium can't touch you. A hit rocked their ship, depleting the shields. Lyra stabilized their course with a gravity well before turning to study Theron. Her 4 eyes narrowed in thought, so much like her father's analytical gaze. You don't seem surprised by this plan, she said finally. Your father had a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. Theron smiled grimly. He also said the archive could reshape reality. That's true. The archive is more than just data. It's potential. Pure possibility locked in quantum patterns. The consortium wants it as a weapon. Father believed it was meant to heal. They broke free of Saturn's gravity well, their pursuers falling behind as the stealth systems finally engaged fully. Mars gleamed ahead, red and promising. Somewhere there, Venna waited, unaware of her father's final plan. "We have 28 days," Theron said. "Before the inheritance period expires, whatever we decide, it has to be soon." Lyra touched the resonance key around his neck. The crystal's pulse quickened, harmonizing with her presence. "Father chose you for a reason," she said softly. "Perhaps it's time we found out why." The ship's sensors chimed a warning. More consortium vessels were emerging from hyperspace near Mars. The race to reach Venna, to uncover the archive's secrets, to decide their shared fate, it was all about to become much more complicated. Theron set course for the Martian engineering complex, wondering if Zorax had foreseen this moment. 3 lives about to be bound together by duty, law, and perhaps something more. The crystal pulsed against his chest, like a second heartbeat counting down the moments until everything would change. The Martian dust storm provided perfect cover as Theron and Lyra approached the engineering complex. Red particles swirled around them, their environment suit's sensors struggling to compensate. The resonance key pulsed stronger now, responding to something within the facility. "Venna's lab is in the quantum research wing," Lyra said through the comm. "But something's wrong. These energy readings." She trailed off as they reached the facility's entrance. The security doors hung open, their locks destroyed with surgical precision. Inside, emergency lights cast crimson shadows through the swirling dust that had invaded the complex. "Not consortium," Theron noted, examining the damage. His cybernetic eye revealed residual energy patterns. "This is Nexus tech. Shadow cores. Impossible. They were destroyed in the war." That's what everyone was meant to think. Theron switched his pulse rifle to scatter mode. "Your father and I helped fake their destruction. Better to have them in the shadows than martyred in public." They moved deeper into the facility, following the trail of destruction. The resonance key's pulse grew more urgent, almost warning. Around them, advanced quantum equipment lay shattered, years of research destroyed. "Venna." Lyra called through their secure channel. "Sister, please respond." A burst of static, then, "Lyra, is father's story true? About the archive?" Venna's voice was strained, afraid. "Where are you?" "Quantum containment chamber. They're trying to force a resonance cascade. They think it will reveal the archive's location." A pause, punctuated by distant explosions. "They're wrong. It will tear reality apart." Theron and Lyra ran, their boots echoing on metal floors. The containment chamber doors were sealed, but through the observation windows, they could see Venna surrounded by figures in phase-shift armor. The distinctive gear of Shadow Corps operators. "The cascade is already building," Lyra said, checking the chamber's readings. "They've linked it to Venna's genetic signature somehow." Inside, Venna stood with her hands pressed against a quantum core, her twilight skin glowing with absorbed energy. She'd grown too, Theron noticed, her 4 eyes holding the same determination he remembered from a young girl who'd spent hours explaining quantum theory to him during diplomatic functions. "Commander Nash," a distorted voice called from within the chamber. "The ghost returns. Did you really think we wouldn't recognize your ship's signature?" "Stand down, Raven," Theron replied, recognizing the voice of his former second-in-command. "You're being used. The consortium is playing both sides. The consortium wants control. We want truth. The archive holds both." The quantum core pulsed, its energy synchronizing with the resonance key. Venna gasped in pain as more power flowed through her. "The resonance pattern," Lyra whispered. "It's not random. Look." The energy flowing through Venna formed familiar symbols, the same patterns etched on the resonance key. But there was something wrong, something incomplete. "It needs all 3 bloodlines," Theron realized. Zorax knew the archive couldn't be accessed by force. It needs harmony, balance, a marriage bond. Lyra finished, not just for legal protection, but for quantum resonance. Vena managed through gritted teeth. Father understood. The archive responds to connection, not coercion. The Shadow Core operators raised their weapons as Theron and Lyra breached the chamber doors. But before anyone could fire, the resonance key blazed with light. Energy coursed between Theron, Lyra, and Vena, forming a triangle of pure possibility. Reality rippled. The quantum core's dangerous cascade stabilized, its power flowing through their improvised circuit. In that moment of connection, Theron saw what Zorax had known. The archive wasn't just data or power, but a bridge between species, cultures, realities. Magnificent, Raven breathed. The resonance patterns are stabilizing. Quick, capture the frequency before. The facility's lights died as a massive EMP pulse hit. When emergency power returned, the Shadow Core operators lay unconscious, their phase shift armor overloaded. Consortium ships entering orbit, Lyra reported, helping Vena away from the quantum core. Lots of them. Then it's time for a family reunion. Theron gathered both sisters close as his ship's autopilot responded to his neural command, bringing it in for a precision dock. Your father left us his ship, the Stellar Drift. If we can reach it, we can access its quantum drives. Vena finished, her scientific mind already racing ahead. Use the resonance patterns we just discovered to hide in parallel spacetime, and buy us time to complete the bond properly, Lyra added. Before the inheritance deadline, they ran for Theron's ship as the facility shook with orbital bombardment. The consortium was done playing nice, willing to risk destroying the archive rather than let it slip away. But as they escaped through the Martian dust storm, the resonance key pulsed with newfound strength. The connection they glimpsed in the quantum chamber lingered, a promise of something greater than survival. The archive was still out there, waiting. And now they had proof. What Zorax had planned, the marriage bond, the blending of bloodlines and cultures. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was the key to unlocking something that could change everything. If they could stay alive long enough to complete it. The stellar drift hung in the void between realities, its quantum drives humming with power drawn from parallel dimensions. Inside the ship's crystalline bridge, Theron watched as Lyra and Vena worked to decode the patterns revealed by their resonance connection. Father encoded everything into the ship's systems, Vena said, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. But it's fragmented, scattered across quantum frequencies. Like breadcrumbs, Lyra added, using her gravity manipulators to stabilize the shifting energy patterns, each piece leading to the next, but only if we follow the right path. The resonance key pulsed steadily now, its rhythm matching the ship's quantum fluctuations. Through the viewports, reality itself seemed to ripple, showing glimpses of what might have been or might yet be. Incoming transmission. The ship's AI announced. Source unknown. Quantum signature matches archive parameters. A hologram materialized in the center of the bridge, Zorax, but not as Theron remembered him. This version was younger, recorded long before the war that had brought them together. If you're seeing this, the image said, then the resonance patterns have aligned. The first test is complete. The hologram smiled. But accessing the archive requires more than just genetic compatibility or quantum harmonics. It requires understanding. The ship shuddered as something grabbed them, pulling them out of the quantum streams. Reality snapped back into focus, revealing a massive structure floating in normal space, a sphere of impossible geometry, its surface covered in the same symbols found on the resonance key. The archive itself, Vena breathed. Father found it. No, Theron corrected, recognizing the construction. He built it. This is where all those classified research projects went during the war. The sphere drew them in, its docking protocols overriding all attempts at resistance. As they approached, they could see other ships already secured to its surface, consortium vessels, Shadow Corps stealth craft, and others Theron didn't recognize. They followed the same breadcrumbs, Lyra realized, but without the proper resonance. They're trapped, Venna finished, unable to access the archive's core or escape its quantum gravity well. The stellar drift docked with surprising gentleness. Zorax's hologram flickered back to life. The archive contains power beyond measure, the ability to rewrite the laws of physics, to reshape reality itself. But power without wisdom brings only destruction. Warning signals flashed as multiple boarding attempts were detected. The trapped ship's crews, desperate to access the archive, saw the stellar drift's arrival as their chance. "We need to reach the core," Theron said, checking his weapons, "before they breach the hull." "The quantum resonance we generated," Venna said suddenly. "It wasn't just about genetics or marriage laws. It was about trust, wasn't it? The ability to form true connections across species, cultures, realities." Lyra's four eyes widened in understanding. "The archive doesn't just need compatible bloodlines. It needs proof that we can overcome our differences, work together, trust each other completely." The first hull breach alarm sounded. Through the security feeds, they could see consortium troops and Shadow Corps operators fighting each other as they tried to reach the bridge. "Then we better prove it fast," Theron said, drawing his pulse rifle. 24 hours until the inheritance deadline. After that, we lose any chance of legally binding our bloodlines." Lyra finished, and the archive chooses a new guardian. They moved through the ship's corridors, using Lyra's gravity manipulation to avoid the worst of the fighting. The resonance key grew warmer with each step, guiding them toward the archive's core. But as they reached the final security door, they found someone waiting. Raven, surrounded by both Shadow Corps and consortium troops. All had their weapons raised, but none fired. "You see," Raven's distorted voice held a note of triumph. "Your father's plan failed. In the end, we all want the same thing, the power to reshape everything." "No," Theron replied, understanding finally clicking into place. "This isn't about power. It's about choice." He lowered his weapon. After a moment's hesitation, Lyra and Venna stepped forward to stand beside him, their hands finding his. The resonance key blazed with light. "The archive doesn't need guardians or soldiers," Theron continued. "It needs people willing to trust, to connect, to choose each other despite their differences." Reality rippled around them as the key's energy merged with the archive's quantum field. In that moment of clarity, they all saw what Zorax had built. Not a weapon or a tool, but a test. A way to prove that different species could truly bond, could choose to share power rather than hoard it. The security door began to open, revealing the archive's core. But before they could step through, a new variable entered the equation, one that would force them to prove their commitment to each other in ways none of them had imagined. The choice to trust was just the beginning. Now they had to show they were willing to sacrifice everything for it. The archive's core chamber defied conventional physics. Quantum energy flowed like liquid light, forming patterns that mirrored the very fabric of reality. But what drew everyone's attention was the figure standing at its center, another hologram of Zorax, this one recorded in his final days. "The true test begins now," the hologram said as Theron, Lyra, and Venna approached. "The archive's power requires more than just resonance. It demands sacrifice." The chamber sealed behind them, cutting off Raven and the others. Through the crystalline walls, they could see the trapped ships beginning to break apart, the archive's quantum field growing unstable. "The archive is collapsing," Venna reported, scanning the energy patterns. "The containment field can't handle so many conflicting quantum signatures. Without stabilization, the collapse will tear apart everything within a light year," Lyra added, "including Mars and Earth." Zorax's hologram smiled sadly. "Power enough to reshape reality. But every change has a cost. Are you willing to pay it?" The resonance key pulsed urgently as the chamber's quantum field intensified. Theron felt the energy trying to connect with them, to complete the bond they'd started. But something was blocking it. Father's final lesson, Lyra said softly. The archive doesn't just need our bloodlines to unite. It needs us to prove we understand what that unity means. To demonstrate that we're willing to give up everything we are, Venna continued, to become something new together. Theron looked at the sisters, brilliant, brave, beautiful in their own unique ways. He'd watched them grow up, helped train them, kept his distance out of respect for their father. But now, your father chose me, he said, not because I'm perfect, but because I understand sacrifice. The war taught me that true strength comes from what we're willing to give up for each other. The chamber shuddered as another wave of quantum instability rippled through the archive. Outside, the trapped ships were disintegrating, their crews evacuating in desperate launches toward empty space. The marriage bond, Theron continued, it was never about politics or power. It was about proving that humans and Nixians could truly become one family. That we could trust each other enough to share everything, including the power to reshape reality itself. Lyra's hand found his, her 4 eyes meeting his gaze. We choose you, Theron Nash, not because of inheritance laws or archive access, but because you've always been part of our family. Venna finished, taking his other hand. You just needed to accept it. The resonance key blazed with pure light as their quantum signatures aligned. Energy flowed between them, not just connecting their bodies but their very beings. In that moment of perfect unity, the archive responded. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as the quantum field stabilized. The archive's power, no longer constrained by doubt or fear, spread through their joined consciousness. They saw everything, every possibility, every potential future. The choice is yours. Zorax's hologram said one final time. What will you reshape first? Through their connection, they reached a decision without words. The archive's power flowed through them, guided by their shared purpose. Reality rippled, shifted, changed. When the light faded, the trapped ships were safely away from the archive's influence. The quantum instability had been neutralized, but more importantly, the knowledge contained within the archive had been transformed. No longer was it a source of raw power to be fought over. Instead, it had become a bridge, a way for different species to share understanding, to learn from each other's experiences and perspectives. The ability to reshape reality remained, but now it required cooperation, trust, and shared sacrifice. The marriage ceremony, when they finally performed it, was both traditional and unprecedented. Human and Nixian customs blended as 3 beings chose to become one family, their bond strengthened by the challenges they'd faced together. The consortium and Shadow Corps eventually accepted the new reality, recognizing that true power lay not in control but in connection. The archive became a symbol of what was possible when different species chose to trust each other. Years later, Theron stood with his wives on the Stellar Drift's observation deck, watching their children. Impossible hybrids of human and Nixian DNA made possible by the archive's power, play among the quantum streams. Your father would be proud, he said softly. His last gift wasn't just the archive or the marriage bond. It was understanding. Lyra agreed, her hand entwined with his. And family, Venna added, leaning against his other side. The resonance key, now shared between all 3 of them, pulsed with warm light, not just a key anymore, but a reminder of the choice they'd made, to trust, to sacrifice, to become something greater together. The archive continued its work, helping other species find the same understanding. And in the quantum streams between realities, the legacy of a dying alien's gift lived on, not in power or control, but in the endless possibilities of love, trust, and connection across the stars.